Live from Palm Springs, California, and from a number of locations around the world, including Jerusalem, Detroit, and London. Here we are with the Leo Zagami Show, today based on a very particular topic of great importance, with new revelations that will definitely change the mind of a lot of researchers who still to this day do a lot of mistakes in mixing up things and blaming always the Jews, but at the same time also mistakenly they blame everything on this Sabbatean-Frankist connection, which of course is to blame. But today we're going to understand what they did in connection with the Jesuits, with the academic sources. So this is not about conspiracy theory, this is about a history lesson. So I would like, of course, my guests to intervene in their specialities. We have, of course, John Barnwell, who is my co-host on Saturday morning from American Intelligence Media. Also, a specialty, of course, is Steinerism. We have also Reverend Perry, who has recently wrote a book on Emmanuel, how you pronounce? Swedenborg. Emmanuel. John always tells me that I pronounce it in the wrong way. And of course, he's important because, as you will discover during the course of this show, he worked closely with Sabbatean-Frankists. And at the same time, we have from Jerusalem our dear friend Lowell Joseph Gallin, who will intervene from time to time because, of course, we will touch on the subjects of Judaism. So if I do any mistakes, we have Lowell there ready to pick up. This story starts with the birth of a Jewish rabbi called Sabbatai Zevi in 1626. He dies in 1676. But it is in 1666, so this 666 seems to be that something will happen during the course of his life. He created a movement that is known as the Sabbateans. This movement will in turn give birth to another claimant to the Messiah throne, which is Jacob Frank. But before going to him, let me introduce to you the subject of Sabbatai Zevi, because it's very important here. Today, we will, I will give you information from historic sources that demonstrates that the Jesuits have been working all along with the Sabbatean Frankists. So we have, for example, lately, a researcher that we all know is called David Icke. He has done excellent things for the Truth movement. But the other day when I saw him with my friend Alex on InfoWars, I noticed his erroneous approach, blaming it all on the Sabbatean-Frankists without connecting them to the Jesuits, because these connections have been proven only lately by academic sources to their full extent. So let's describe to our viewers what is a Sabbatean-Frankist. We're talking here about an heresy, a really bad heresy that materialized within the Jewish world, connected to the fact that, of course, Messianism is very important within the Jewish world. And so Sabbatai Zevi was born in the Ottoman Empire, and eventually the Sabbateans will undermine in the centuries that followed the birth of Sabbatai Zevi this empire to the point of destroying it. And so this connection with the Jesuits might have not been born immediately with Sabbatai Zevi, but soon after with his followers, because they became protected by the Catholic Church, who wanted to convert, of course, Jews, but also saw them as instrumentally important on a variety of things, especially when the Jesuits started from the Cromwell era to lose power in England, and of course because of the rise of the Jews in influence. So let's go down. First of all, let me describe a little bit this heresy of Sabbatai Zevi and how it manifested after with Jacob Frank, because a lot of people may not know this, but of course Lowell can then debate on this a little bit and discuss it with us. There is, of course, a belief in the reincarnation that also is associated with certain branches of Judaism. The Sabbateans were born out of Sabbatai Zevi, and of course later on they will be fought especially by Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and in the end this whole war with Jacob Frank will manifest in the birth of Hasidic Judaism, which of course has been very important in the last couple of centuries, and we all know about it. But not many people know about what has happened with the Sabbatean heresy, which is, of course, the Sabbatean heresy is considered by Jews as a complete going against the basic tenets of the Jewish faith, especially because initially with Sabbatean Zevi, they started to pull this idea that because they had to manifest the Messianic era, they had to transgress. But then with Sabbatean Zevi, they were still maybe sinning and repenting in a modality that we have seen also with certain Catholic branches. With Jacob Frank later on, who claimed to be a reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi, then we see the full manifestation of this heresy, which basically becomes involved with early forms of sexual magic. And these forms of sexual magic will lately infiltrate the whole Western initiatic system with the cousin of Jacob Frank founding the Asian Brethren, which became itself a Masonic manifestation of the Golden Rose Cross, which in turn was under the control of the Jesuits. Jacob Frank became himself a convert. But first of all, who was Jacob Frank? Why is he associated with Sabbatai Zevi? Sabbatai Zevi basically was born 100 years before. He died in 1676. Jacob Frank instead comes along in 1726 and will die in 1791. But Jacob Frank is also instrumental for the Catholic and for the Jesuits because he will bring the biggest number of converts from Judaism to the Catholic faith. And already then we start to see that the Sabbatean Frankists, because that's how they will come to be known after Jacob Frank, claims to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi through a guy known as Otman Baba, who was his teacher, who had inherited the soul of Otman Baba, but was known as Beriaka Russo. Now, these are Sabbateans, and Sabbateans had manifested in the Ottoman Empire later on as crypto-Jews, because at one point, in 1666, Sabbatai Zevi is forced to convert to the Islamic faith by Sultan Mohammed IV. Now, what happens here? For the first time, they create the crypto-Jews. The crypto-Jews that, of course, will then infiltrate gradually various branches of the Ottoman Empire, but they will also spread throughout the whole of Europe, particularly active in parts of Poland, which are now Ukraine, which are also, Hasidic Judaism will be later born in those areas. So this whole thing really manifests a great revolution within the Jewish faith, but it's also a threat to the Jewish faith because, yes, it has helped the Jews reclaim their land in a way by also creating early forms of what became then known as Zionism. But the Sabbatean movement believed in reincarnation. So from Sabbatai Zevi, who basically, he becomes public a convert to Islam, but in reality, they keep on the Jewish heresy in secret, and this Jewish heresy is very similar, reminiscent of today's New Age, a little bit in some of the ways. Now, according to the late Rabbi Marvin Altman, who was a big scholar regarding this kind of subject, he said that they believed that sin was basically holy, and so it had to be practiced for its own sake. You can imagine that this will lead to a whole range of debauchery. But there was also then a political arm to the Sabbateans that fully manifested with Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, of course, the chief revolutionary of the Committee for Union and Progress, the guy who himself became the founder of the Republic of Turkey, destroying basically the remains of the Ottoman Empire, and functioning himself also as an agent of certain Masonic forces, which of course were infiltrated by the Sabbatean Frankists. But to think that the Sabbatean Frankists have acted alone without the Jesuits, well, that's not realistic, because in this whole story we have another important person, another important figure, which is Dr. Falk. Dr. Falk, who was the Balashim of London. What is a Balashim? Well, Lowell will, of course, tell us a little bit more. But it's basically somebody who has to deal with the holy names of God and who knows how to deal with the holy names of God. And of course, a disciple of the Balashim of London was Giuseppe Balsamo. Now, this Balsamo, and he was, of course, a relative of mine, known as the Count of Cagliostro. The Balsamo is, for some people, a derivative of the Jewish Baal Hashem. In fact, when Goethe, who was a member of the Illuminati, goes after the death of Cagliostro down to Sicily in his famous Italian trips, he actually confirms that Cagliostro had Jewish roots, and that, of course, this could be linked to Baal Shem. Baal Hashem. So the Baal Hashem, you pronounce it well, Lowell. You can tell me if I pronounce it wrongly, because, of course, I'm not Jewish per se, meaning full-on Jew, so I don't know how to speak your language. But is it pronounced Baal Hashem?
With a wonderful Italian accent, yes.
Okay, thank you, Lowell. And Balashim, there is various Balashim. Of course, we all know about the founder of the guy who basically devised and brought to light the splendid Book of Splendors, no? And we know also, of course, of the creators of there were many Balashim. So this particular one in London was accused of being a Sabbatean, but he was also particularly influential at that time. So influential that Emanuel Swedenborg, who Reverend David has written a book about, recently published, went to actually live next to his house. He wanted to be the closest possible to Dr. Falk, as he was commonly known. He even made Dr. Falk, because Dr. Falk was commonly known and was also revered by Illuminati, Freemasons, and publicly even by the Count of Cagliostro, who said he was his disciple. In fact, the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry is said to be based actually on the teachings of Dr. Falk. Now, Dr. Falk was also mentioned by Rudolf Steiner, of course. The Masonic Magician is a very good book that, of course, was written by an English author. Actually, it's two authors. It's an English and a Scottish author. One is Cooper, which I know very well, is the archivist of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. The other one is, I think, Pippa Fox or whatever her name. And, of course, The Life and Death of the Count of Cagliostro is Egyptian Rite. May I say that in that book, though, and I have analyzed it because in Italy I published the full-on version of the Egyptian rites, of the Egyptian rite of Cagliostro, there is some things missing. For example, to not make the actual Egyptian rite reborn again, they have omitted the tracing boards, they have omitted part of the ritual. So it's not complete, John, may I say, in that extent. But of course, that is for people from within the Masonic world to know that. Let's start here today, because recently David Icke has published a book, of course, which I think it might have a lot of interesting material. I have seen that there is definitely some interesting stuff in it. So I'm not criticizing, of course, the content of this new book called The Trigger. But what I noticed from watching his interview with Alex was that he blamed everything on the Sabbatean Frankists, and he didn't say one word about the Jesuits. So at that point, I said, that's fine. But you're going to have a rude awakening when my new book comes out before Christmas, because my new book is going to bring you all the names, all the years, all the documents, and you're going to see that the Sabbatean Frankists and the Jesuits and the Vatican have been in bed for a very long time. And they are working together to destroy both the Christian faith, traditional Catholicism, and traditional Jewish religion. So here we are talking about heretics, Satanists, and I, of course, differ from Reverend David, who is a little bit more moderate in his approach, who likes to also confront himself with Jesuits. I personally know that 5 centuries ago, when Ignacio Loyola was in that cave in Spain, he dealt with the devil and with his associates. And what came out of that group, for me, is not Christianity. The problem here is that when the Jesuits went to India, they pretended to be Brahmins, and they even didn't administer the Christian sacraments to inferior classes because they believed to be Brahmins. They went to China and they even claimed to be masters of the Confucius faith. And there was a whole controversy which exploded that lasted for 8 popes, called the Chinese controversy, in which in the end they were blamed, of course, for embracing paganism. And who they went to, the Jesuits, to claim they were innocent? To the Emperor of China, to say, the Emperor of China says that we are good people. The Emperor of China wasn't a Christian, the Jesuits. And so for me, the Jesuits are the biggest heretics, just as the Sabbatean Frankists are the biggest heretics of the Jewish faith. So if Jesus came back in this moment of time, he will put both the Sabbatean Frankists and the Jesuits hanging upside down for heresy. So nowadays, this is the start of the show. I just want to show you something before we go on. I want to share on the screen something just to prove once again what I was saying. And of course, here we go with the allure of forbidden knowledge, the temptation of Sabbatean literature for mainstream rabbis in the Frankist moment. And these are the words of Rabbi Naaman of Bratslav, which I think it was a great scholar. He says, "For that Sabbatai Zevi, cursed be his name, led astray a number of the greatest men of the generation and outstanding scholars. They left the fold and spoke evil regarding the oral law. But when a tzaddik sweetens their words, we transform the sayings back on the Torah." So, having started with this, I want to get, of course, all your ideas on what I've said up until now. My ideas will become also a book that will be published before Christmas for the joy of all our viewers. This book, of course, is not based only on this, but it will bring you the insights of Ignatian spirituality and also of the Jewish heresy, but as well as the Christian heresy. Because Christian heresy is not a joke. And so from this point onwards, first of all, let's give the word to our Jewish friend Lowell in Jerusalem regarding what I've said.
As the Talmud says, he who is ashamed will not learn. And I have to say that on the subject of the people present, yourself, Reverend Parry, and Mr. Barnwell, I'm the least informed. I can say in a general sense, first of all, that I want to wish all your viewers and listeners a Shavua Tov, which means have a good week, from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, hill of the priests, Abu Tur, Givat Hanania, overlooking the Temple Mount, where I live and work. And I also want to point out that we should remember that today is the 78th anniversary of the Imperial Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And to honor and remember Mitsu Fuchida, the Japanese lead pilot, who after the war became a committed Christian and spent the rest of his life working for world peace. He felt that what he had done was wrong, and he repented from it. It's very important to keep in mind that people, for example, the man who wrote Amazing Grace was a slave trader, and he was in a ship that was going to be capsized, and they were all going to drown. So he said to God on the way with his African slaves, "I know what I'm doing is wrong. If you will let me live, sort of a Jonah story, I'll spend the rest of my life as an abolitionist. And he did. And then he wrote one of the most famous songs of all time, Amazing Grace. Regarding what you said, I want to just tell a short story from the Talmud about 4 rabbis who enter the Pardes, what is the Pardes? The garden of mystical knowledge. Rabbi Akiva, and what happened to them, and why it's not recommended for rank and file people to enter the gardens of mystical knowledge. One rabbi died. The other one went insane. The third one became a heretic, Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, who had the name Acher, other. And the only one who returned with his sanity was Rabbi Akiva, who was a convert, who was a poor shepherd, and the daughter of a rich man, Rachel, fell in love with him and believed that he could become a great leader. He was, in the end, he was martyred by the Romans. Now, I want to add a note here. When Christians look at Christians thrown to the lions in the first centuries of the Roman Empire, they say, oh, that's the price of faith. But when they look at the destruction of the temple and the dispersion of the Jews, oh, that's the punishment for sin. In other words, you can look at suffering and you can say that's martyrdom. And the other would say, aha, you're getting punished for your sins. So you have in the Christianity as a developed classical Christianity, a real theological schizophrenia. And this is reflected in how Christians look at Jews in general. Regarding what you said about the Sabbateans and the Frankists, I listened to David Icke, and he says his sources are Gershom Scholem and Rabbi Marvin Antelman. I would agree, Gershom Scholem was perhaps the greatest secular academic in the Jewish world of the last century who wrote about mysticism, mystical traditions, and these movements. And then Barry Hamish popularized the teachings of Rabbi Marvin Antelman, who was a quote-unquote Orthodox. I really didn't like the term because I have no concept of Reform or denominational Judaism, about to cure the opiate and other books. So in that sense, David Icke, drawing on these sources, we would draw on the same sources.
No, but
as far as
Robert, sorry to interrupt you. I think that David didn't do anything wrong here. He simply didn't investigate further the matter because he only brings a part of the story and not the whole picture. Please.
I want to add something about that. All of us, as it says in Proverbs, there's a wisdom in a multitude of counselors, meaning good ones. No one person can see the whole picture. If all the good people work together and put together what they know, then the bigger picture starts to emerge. Perhaps David Icke didn't talk about it because he didn't read the book you're going to publish. He just doesn't know. He talked about what he knew, and I think he said it rather well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. John, your take on that?
Well, first of all, hello, all you distinguished gentlemen. Yeah, this is a subject that's really captivated my interest in my studies, for 45 years or so, right? Back when I first became aware of the writings of Gershom Scholem and Scholem, people pronounce it differently. Over the last few years, I've developed an online friendship with Martha Keith Schuchard, who's really the principal author that's writing on the development of the distinctions between the House of Hanover Freemasonry and the Jacobite Freemasonry and the Sabbatean influence, specifically through the Sabbatean Frankists, the Polish rabbi. And she is a full scholar. She was the protege of Gershom Scholem. And she's honored me with a notation in one of her essays, giving me credit for a source regarding the Crusades. But anyways, So when you start getting into these kinds of things, it's very easy to simplify your task by saying, aha, meaning you think you've finally found the answer. And as Lowell was so succinctly showing, like St. Paul said, we see through a glass darkly. And so to see the whole picture, I mean, I've spent most of my adult life with this, and I managed one of the largest private Egyptology and Mesopotamian studies libraries in the world and created a relational database of subject matter. So I've left no stone unturned, especially after managing the largest esoteric occult bookstore in the world that dealt with all areas of the history of ideas and health and everything else. So anyways, to narrow this down, I would say that if you look, what is the common theme amongst the manifestation of Sabbatean Frankist and Jakob Frank in Poland, and then you could also include the birth of the Jesuits. They were born out of crisis. That's the most common denominator between the three of them. In the case of Sabbatean Frankist, there was the Cossacks slaughtering thousands of Jews in Ukraine, right, and surrounding areas. With Jakob Frank, there was also a pogrom against Jews at that time, and people were in despair. And he came along and said that he was the reincarnation of Sabbatean Frankist and that he had an answer to their ability to transform their lives, and resulting in the most just unbelievable transgressions of Judaic law. Now, in response to that, there was a Council of the Four Lands in which they kicked out of Judaism all the Frankists, and they said for 10 generations, okay, so that you were anathema, you were no longer, can you call yourself Jews? And you're just totally obliterated as far as Judaism is concerned. Now, when you get into the developments, the result from that, and most of the problems that the Jewish people have been a direct result of Sabbatean Frankist machinations through their relationship with the House of Rothschild, and with also other noble houses in Europe. And so then when you start getting into some of the more modern developments, it's just absolutely astounding how intimately connected this impulse is. Now, again, when I go back to the idea of crisis innovation, we'll call it, coin a new phrase, crisis innovation. It's what we're going through right now with President Trump. It's a crisis innovation as a result of 9/11. But when you get into understanding the Jesuits, what was going on then was the Reformation. So the spearhead of the Counter-Reformation was the Jesuit order.
Yes, of course. And they became the tool for which the Catholic Church could claim back some importance and later infiltrate the Reformation with their Counter-Reformation. They became the main agents of this Counter-Reformation, which were allowed to use also techniques and ways that were not permitted for other orders of the Catholic Church. And one of the things they created was to covertly act by dressing up as Brahmins, as followers of Confucius, as other religions. Still now they do it. And the same technique was used by Sabbatean Frankists, who of course in the in the public will convert to Catholicism, will probably claim themselves to be good Jews or whatever, but they were basically acting covertly. Emmanuel Swedenborg, I pronounce him always, John, you can correct me.
Swedenborg
in English. He's very important because in his work and in his connections with the Sabbatean Frankists, at one point he realized to have been played, to have been manipulated. he realizes, and this actually has been confirmed by the excellent research that in the last few years has been conducted by several academics, especially Marcia Kate Schuchard from the University of Texas in Austin, but also a number of other academic sources which have also been applauded for their efforts by the famous Anton Febvre, which of course we all know as the professor emeritus at the Sorbonne, which is like I personally regard them as one of my teachers when it comes down to the history of all these esoteric groups. However, we find here that there is an obscure clandestine connections between the Sabbatean Jews and the Swedish Hats, which of course, Swedish Hats, there was basically part of Sweden which was siding with France, which was siding with the Jesuits. Emanuel Swedenborg was part of all this setup. He wasn't only somebody who was interested in the esoteric side. He was actually active in the political side. David, you have done a lot of research on Swedenborg, and you are, of course, in London. Do you know anything about his own connections with Dr. Falk? Because it seems that that is one of the main connections. But then there is other also connections, and I will of course like to talk to you about many things regarding Swedenborg, but he was definitely a figure of a certain importance, because of course he also assumes importance in the layout of the various Masonic rites which are shaping up in that era. So please, David, you have the floor.
Gosh, I think it's me that's the baby compared to some of the experts I'm looking at in all of this. Heavens. And yes, I accentuate the positive. What can I say? I hang out with Jesuits, you know, oh heavens, all of which tend to be very nice people over cups of tea. I don't know what they do when I'm not in the room, but, you know, with me, they tend to be very, very decent human beings who are deeply worried about the root of the Roman Catholic Church. Oh, Swedenborg. I suppose, like him, I've got this intense Protestant, poking the collar here, Protestant thirst for virtue. Swedenborg was this sort of modern international guy in a century where none of that had come along yet. You know, in a sense, he was the Madonna of his generation. You know, the Swedish government would comment when he'd arrived in a city. They'd comment when he left the city. What he did was of intense interest to the public in a time when the public didn't really have celebrities in the way that we know now. Swedenborg flirted with nearly everything, as his incredible drive towards higher truths. I mean, he was a driven man. He was a man under a terrible compulsion to achieve the knowledge, as he saw it, of Christ redeemed. So I'm never surprised at anyone he met, anyone he started living next to, anyone he questioned, anyone he wanted to talk to, because the man was on fire, a bit like Picasso. You know, he needed to know, he wanted to talk, he wanted to experience. And just because he was a man of affairs as well as a mystic, people forget he was a natural scientist. You know, one of my Jesuit friends called him quite tellingly a couple of years ago a naturalist that had visions. You know, I think that's the bottom line, basically. You know, an intense scholar, a gifted individual. One must be careful because of the time frame to assume he's embroiled in international conspiracies simply because he was a man that got to know people in an age when others didn't. He was one of the world's first, you know, global jet setters in an age when there was no global jet setting. He would make your acquaintance. He would want to find out, and he would want to know if you had a connection with spirit or not. Whether, you know, I mean, I was having an argument during the week about Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. I like reading Nietzsche. I think there's a great deal to learn from Nietzsche. You know, Nietzsche's the drunk at the party, and he's obviously very intelligent, and he's obviously very well read, but hey, he's the drunk at the party. So that doesn't mean you reject every single thing he says. It means you put it in context. You know, the fact that other people drew on Swedenborg's work, which is voluminous, doesn't surprise me. that, you know, the fact they were looking for ways to trigger similar experiences in themselves doesn't surprise me either. But by no stretch of the imagination does that implicate Swedenborg in their work or in these more clandestine moves. I mean, I did a little research before we all came on air. I noticed the Sabbateans were also claiming types of Gnosticism. And actually their claims to transgress are quite complex. You know, in India, some of the castes, I mean, if you're looking at people like the Aghori ascetics, followers of Shiva as opposed to Vishnu, they will transgress to liberate the sparks of light that are held by the forces of evil. You know, what do I detect there? Some sort of Manichaean hangover. People forget how far Manichaeanism went across the world. I mean, it got as far as northern China, where Mani to this day is known as the Buddha of light. It's a compelling and powerful philosophy. So they are considered good guys by the Brahminical castes, even though they're Shaivites and they're transgressives, unlike the people who are considered guilty of black magic, who simply indulge in transgression for the sake of transgression. So I think we very, very quickly run into very deep waters, and we have to be a little careful.
But in fact, David, from what my studies, what I've noticed of Swedenborg, of Swedenborg, as we call him, I noticed that at one point, and this actually is also underlined in this excellent work that has been brought out by several academics, which is this work by Marsha Kate Schuchard, which has been corroborated by the work of other academics as editors, which is Barbara Crawford from the St. Andrews University. We have David Kirby from London. We have Jon Sugerson from the University of Oslo. We have Ingrid Olle from the University of Bergen. We have Richard Wong from Vancouver. We have Pietro Goreski from the University of California, Riverside. We're talking here about evidence. Today, I'm not talking about conspiracy, but I'm talking strictly about evidence. Now, the evidence here is that Swedenborg, or however you want to pronounce his name, was a secret agent. So there is evidence of it even in a letter that I'm going to read to you, and it's written by Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, protector, of course, of the Jesuits who were kicked out of the Vatican for subversive activities in 1773, amongst other things. On July 9, 1781, after Cagliostro's arrival, Count Cagliostro, who claimed to be a disciple of Dr. Falk, who in turn was a Sabbatean, and who was in turn also connected to Swedenborg. This is the letter written by the great Empress of Russia, and this is not a conspiracy theory. Master Cagliostro has arrived at a moment very favorable for him, a moment when several lodges of Freemasons, infatuated with the principle of Swedenborg, want desperately to see spirits. They have therefore run to Cagliostro, whom they say is in possession of all the secrets of Dr. Falk, intimate friend of the Duke de Richelieu. So here we are not, once again, talking about conspiracy theories, David, we are historians. And when I see historical archive, there is a whole bunch of documents that confirm that as many characters, I'm not saying that only Swedenborg, or however you want to call him, was a secret agent. Like you pointed out at the beginning, these were men that were traveling around in an age in which people didn't have the same communication. I know it from my own family experience. We were aristocrats, of course, and we were the only people 100 years ago to travel around and be able to live at the same time in Chile, Great Britain, south of Italy, or whatever, because the aristocrats were the only one traveling with, and then they were their servants. That's it. People also forget that until 50 years ago in Italy, 50% of the population didn't even know how to write. People think in a setup in their minds, which is the setup of today. So you did an excellent thing, David, when you pointed out on the fact that Swedenborg was a man of his age. And a man of his age would have worked for the interest of his own country, which was Sweden. That's why he worked with the Sabbateans, apparently, on a deal with Morocco, which, of course, you know, they are Jewish, they are Sabbateans, they want to make business. Swedenborg is used as also somebody who, because also there is this other claim which is important, it has been confirmed. Emanuel Swedenborg, whoever you want to, he was somebody who regarded himself as having a specific mission to the Jewish people. Now, this you can confirm, David, no?
Oh, absolutely. Leo, I mean, I'm absolutely certain you're vastly more knowledgeable than me on these issues. I'm absolutely certain of that. I mean, don't forget, David Icke, does he even remember me? I used to be a director-producer for Art at the People's Voice. And David Icke strikes me as very solid but limited. He'll never speak to me again if he hears that. But, you know, there are wider sources, and I know you cover the wider sources. It's one of the reasons we get on, and I could listen to you for hours. You know that. You know, all I'm saying is we have to exercise caution. Everything you said is true. I agree with that. But as you were speaking, I was remembering the time when Gerald Gardner visited Julius Evola to talk about witchcraft, which is never, ever really discussed nowadays. And you know, oh yeah, I mean, it was a very, very famous misunderstood meeting where the two just didn't understand what the other one was on about at all. You know, and there was a famous letter that Julius Evola wrote, going on and on and on about Gerald Gardner's puffy handbag. You know, why is that? Why is a man wearing a woman's handbag? What on earth is he doing? And Gerald Gardner was saying, does this man know anything about traditional witchcraft? You know, I mean, so all I'm saying is we have to exercise a certain amount of caution, because it doesn't mean that Gerald Gardner was in the same circle as Julius Evola. You know, and people meet, you know, more so in the modern world than then. I have no doubt that someone as loyal and patriotic as Swedenborg would have served the interests of an enlightened country such as Sweden as he saw it. I have absolutely no doubt, and let's be honest, it happens now all the time, that, you know, people in very lofty positions get asked to, you know, not spying. If you're in that area, you know, you might hear something. We're not going to call it spying, and that goes on all the time, doesn't it? You know, I mean, it's even happened to me. You know, all I'm saying is let's be careful. Swedenborg would have talked the hind legs off a donkey to get anybody interested in spiritualism. And if he could see himself, if an opportunity arose for him to help encourage the development of that type of spiritualism, if that's what it was, in other people, he would have, you know, had sleepless nights and done his absolute best to make sure that happened. So guilt by association sometimes, most certainly. You know, what's important in Swedenborg's case is the orientation. As he saw it, don't jump on me there, Leo, progressive Christianity leading towards a greater understanding of Christ consciousness. Forgive me for using a New Age term there. You know, and I've absolutely no doubt he met everybody. And yes, was he involved in what we would call nowadays intelligence and security? Of course he was. Let's not be naive. But that doesn't mean, I have him down as a bit of an idealist, I confess. You know, it doesn't mean that the man was up to no good behind the scenes. To my view, he was up to good behind the scenes and a bit naive. That's how I read it.
Yeah, no, but in fact, I mean, from the research that these eminent academics from the Northern world have brought together in this Emanuel Swedenborg, Secret Agent on Earth and in Heaven, which I have read and studied also to confront the various sources, I noticed that at one point, he himself basically is kind of worried because, you know, when he goes to Amsterdam after he's been in London and he's confronting himself with all these Sabbatean sources, at one point he understood that basically the danger of this heresy. He himself understood it. So I mean, and that's pretty interesting, and I think it deserves you know, to be talked about today. But also, for example, we have this whole thing with reincarnation. You know, Swedenborg is basically somebody who was regarded by many as the reincarnation of Ignatius Loyola, and not only by Rudolf Steiner. And I'm telling you that because at one point, when the Jesuits were sent to Tibet, and that was one of the first places where they were sent, they studied reincarnation and how the various, reincarnation manifested and how they had to be identified. And they brought all this knowledge to the archives of the city of Lyon, to the library of the Jesuits in Lyon. And Chevalier Ramsay, the tutor of Charles Edward Stuart, known for his famous speech that gave birth to the high degrees of Freemasonry, he had already been there. And Swedenborg went there for 5 days in the city of Lyon to study this documentation regarding reincarnation, which was very important. So my next question is for Lowell: reincarnation in the Jewish tradition.
There are mixed views about it. Some people believe in it, some people don't. It's not considered a fundamental belief. Fundamental beliefs here's the prayer book, okay, in Hebrew and English, 3 times a day, Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv, morning, afternoon, and evening prayers. Religiously observant Jews read the Shemona Esrei, the 18 prayers. That's pretty much the basic principles, which begins with, we believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that he will send a Redeemer for Israel and the whole world, and then he will end sickness, aging, and death, right at the beginning. This is an important point. Rabbi Mendel Kessen, who's one of our teachers today in the Jewish world, who also has a doctorate in clinical psychology, and he said in one of his talks, all mental illnesses or conditions trace back to the fear of death, and or perhaps one could say nihilistic and anarchistic behavior was since the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, and lifespans went down from about 1,000 years to 120 years to the end, about 1899, 1900, the average lifespan was what, 40 years? Most people we're not here that long. Sickness, aging, and death, poverty, war, horror, that's a general condition everywhere. You have 2 choices. You can eat, drink, and be merry as much as you can. That's one approach. Or as Solomon said at the end of, is it Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, fear God and observe his commandments. That's the whole man. You got 2 roads. And we can see where Jeffrey Epstein and his friends went on one road. Or these nihilistic movements such as the Sabbateans and Frankists went on their road.
Sorry to interrupt. We can say that really the way that Jeffrey Epstein acted is very similar to the way of the Sabbatean Frankists.
Absolutely. Or you can be Clara Barton and Frederick Douglass and devote your life, Albert Schweitzer, devote your life, however short our lives may be. What Mozart lived 36 years. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov was at the Baal Shem Tov, lived 38 years. These guys, Fiorello LaGuardia, our greatest mayor in the United States, New York, lived, 65 years? They did a lot in their short time. Let's take it right back to the beginning, the root of all the troubles. As you might have seen in the message I sent to you and Alex and several others, there are 2 ways to read Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the conventional way of reading it, even in our translations. That's not what the Kabbalah and the Zohar say. They say the real way to read it is, in the beginning, God, who's an unnamed noun, created the Elohim, the Shemayim, the Aretz. Before he created this entire time-space continuum, he created the celestial powers, the Elohim. So that the whole issue, it's plural, so there's more than one God. No, there isn't. There's one God who created, even before the physical time-space world we live in, the celestial powers. Now, some of them appear to have rebelled against him and fell. That's not just in Christian tradition. You have that in Jewish tradition too. So you have Satan, the Satan, his demons and fallen angels, been causing trouble ever since for all of humanity. And standing up to that and choosing a good path rather than a bad one is something that has been going on since then. Now this is also for David Icke and your friends. Let's get a little historical here. The world began not just 500 years ago or 400 years ago. Let's go back 6,000 years ago. Now we've mentioned the Satan, his demon and fallen angels. What principalities of the air it's referred to in the Greek Testament, which is what I would call the New Testament, because I don't have an Old Testament, neither did Jesus of Nazareth. So you go back to the Israelites going out of Egypt, and the rabbis are talking, these are very old traditions, that a mixed multitude, the Erev Rav, led by their magicians, went out with the Israelites, and there's a chain from them throughout Israelite/Jewish history. The Erev Rav, mixed multitude. Sitra Achra is a Kabbalistic term for the other side, the dark forces, the Satan, to the Sabbateans, the Frankists, and certain elements within labor Zionists. That's another point. And most of the movements you've mentioned, whether it's the Masons or the Jesuits, in terms of an onion, most of the rank and file people anywhere have no idea what's going on. They're not supposed to. It's what you need to know as you go up to the top. So the number of people doing good or evil, at the very top, there's not that many of them. So for us, Sabbateans and Frankists, yes, they were triggered by the Khmelnytsky massacres. And there, let's note, we have a very strange situation in Ukraine. Khmelnytsky's grandkids love their Jewish president Zelensky. They think Zelensky, who's as Yiddish as chicken soup, they are so popular in Ukraine, he'll clean up the mess. Well, you need Trump and the Patriots and SEAL Team 6 behind you to do that. You don't just go out to the oligarchs, put a flower in their rifles and say, please be nice. As Eric Blair, George Orwell said, the reason we sleep soundly at night is because rough men are going to beat up the bad guys.
But the Sabbatean Frankists had a kind of weird claim here that brought them to a direct confrontation with traditional Jewish, because they were saying, the Frankists basically were saying that they needed to sacrifice Christians, that basically the Talmudic teachings were saying that you had to sacrifice Christians. So they were kind of like the Sabbatean doctrine was brought together so then they could be closer to Christians. And all this brought, of course, to a teaching that was, of course, heresy. But most of all, I always noticed that wherever the Sabbateans were practicing, either in the open, of course, with Jacob Frank, they were in the open. He was, but there's always this recurring thing. They always brought Jews to convert to Christianity and to Catholicism in particular, because there was like this secret alliance. And they disputed the Talmud over Talmudic teachings because they said that the Talmud requires ritual sacrifice of Christians, which I don't think is correct. What do you think, Lowell?
I don't believe that that's correct. I've heard these claims. Sabtai Tzvi was given a choice by the Sultan. You can convert or die. And he said, well, I don't really think martyrdom is for me. His followers had a problem. What happened to our Messiah? He just became a Muslim. So his followers went underground, practicing some form of Judaism in secret and pretending to be Muslims outwardly. It suggested that Kemal Ataturk and his group were from the Donmed, that group. So they went over to Islam on the outside and who knows what else on the inside. Then Jacob Frank brought his followers to some form of Catholicism. Now, in the short, what does Moses say in Psalm 90? Life is short and brood is 70 years, and if by extra strength 80 years, it's frightening, sickness, aging, death, poverty, war. How are you going to react to that? Trouble, chaos, most of the time in most places, till the exceptions when there isn't trouble and chaos. So you have in all religious traditions the idea of redemption through sin, in Tantric Buddhism. Well, let's go have sex in the cemeteries with dead bodies. I know a little bit about that here. This is the Buddhist Association of Thailand, Asalaha Puja, Seeds of Peace, their journal from July 1976. For my Mysticism East and West course at my Quaker College, Swarthmore, I wrote an essay about my personal experiences with Zen meditation at the Zen Studies Society in Philadelphia. And my professor, Donald Swearer, I hope he's still alive, is a wonderful man, said, look, this isn't really very good as an academic paper, but it's a great journalistic account of your personal experience when the beginner begins Zen meditation. So even though they were in the middle of one of their frequent revolutions, the editor of the Seeds of Peace, which is published under royal patronage, published it in this little journal, very nicely done. I still have some copies. So I know a little bit about the subject of meditation. And I can't see anybody concentrating on their breathing and counting up numbers or counting the cows that go over the moon to focus your mind. The trouble is, in religious traditions, going back to the beginning, you have human sacrifice, child sacrifice, the idea that if one engages in any kind of prohibited, it depends on your tradition, relations, let's have sex with animals, or dead bodies. There's a reason on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, it gets not to grand theological principles, but in the prayers, in Leviticus, the list of prohibited relations is read. Don't have sex with your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your daughter, your son. Why? Because people did those things. And certainly don't offer your children to Moloch. What the Sabbateans taught and what the Frankists taught, you're all far more familiar with than me. But once you go down that road, the idea is up is down and down is up. Again, redemption through sin. And then once you do what, I killed one child or one person last year, well, that's boring. Let's kill two. Once you go on that road, it's a self-perpetual motion machine, which leads to suicide and murder.
Now, John, I wanted to talk to you about how the Sabbatean Frankist in turn gave birth to basically what later on Pascal Randolph and then Crowley and let's not forget another thing, because people don't know this, but also Max Theon, connected to the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, which was very influential on Madame Blavatsky, came also from a Sabbatean Frankist background. So it's like this Sabbatean heresy did a lot of damage. So we can say that, and at the same time we have, of course, the Jesuits who seem to not mind hanging out with the Sabbateans. What do you think, John?
Well, I'm in agreement with many things that have been said here. And I think at this point, because this is such a delicate subject, and so I deferred Lowell's comments, it's far too easy to oversimplify what we're talking about. And that way you can go, aha, it's those guys over there, they did it. And you find a scapegoat. See, and that's the whole thing in understanding, like a sacrifice they'd sacrifice goats and sheep. What were they trying to do? They were attempting to kind of drain off their sins. See, it was a way of purging themselves of sin, and so they'd sacrifice a ram or what have you. And so we have this whole idea about the scapegoat.
And at times, John, sorry to interrupt you, they did it because they wanted to kind of make sure that the Messianic era will unfold faster and faster, no?
Well, yeah, because you see, it seems as though every generation thinks that this is it. There's always a group of people that say, okay, we're here, get ready. And so you had a lot of Sabbateans, as Rabbi Antelman would call them, but a lot of modern ones call themselves Sabbateans, so go figure. I guess that's like Swedenborg and Swedenborg. But anyways, getting back to the subject, you have to give credit where credit is due, but you also have to understand the specific milieu in which things developed. And that's where I take to task some of the statements by Alex Jones or by David Icke. I mean, Alex Jones entirely misses the boat on the true impulses of Rosicrucianism, because he tries to implicate the Rosicrucians in the machinations of...
but John, sorry to say...
And there is that element, but...
No, but I think that Alex... No, yeah, John, but you're wrong, because Alex then said that the Rosicrucians have also done positive things and have, with the New Atlantis, being behind the foundations of America.
Yeah, but I didn't finish what I was saying. Okay, so if you get into Rosicrucianism, the true Rosicrucian stream, you find that it's not a club. You can't join. there's no membership fees, but there are many organizations out there that use the name Rosicrucian with varying degrees of results, varying degrees of depth. And I've met members of the inner orders of various of them and over the years, and I still maintain that the original Rosicrucians, it was not a club. It was a conclave or a group of initiates of a very high level that were very much central to the development of Western civilization. Likewise, I feel the same about the developments of the Kabbalah within Judaism, that there's
John, it seems like
optimistic figures involved in their development. But see, the problem is that the inverse forces always want to subvert and pervert that which is most venerable. So you have, all these movements, like the current Pope. He's like a degradation of the Catholic Church, but through what he's saying, he's totally going against all of the doctrines of the Church. So is he a Catholic? I mean, I told a young
John,
I don't consider Jesuits Catholic.
He's not going against the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were the ones who started the controversy 3 centuries ago when they were in India pretending to be Brahmins. They started the controversy when they were in China pretending to be disciples of Confucius. And now they embrace Pachamama because, remember, in 1939, thanks to the Jesuits who finally had gone back into the church, into the Catholic Church in 1815, and gradually moved back to take control of the whole show. In 1939, they received the possibility, with a papal sanctioned bull, to embrace these other pagan rituals. And then, during the Second Vatican Council, officially they could lead to what we now see with the Pachamama affair. So in the end, this paganism crept in because of the Jesuits, and he's just being a Jesuit. He's not being anything else.
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing that at all. The point I'm trying to make is that people tend to want to simplify their task in understanding things, and I try to work with an open system like the mathematical philosopher Georg Cantor, is that I'm basing my conclusions on the idea that I don't have all the information. And so as long as you're open-ended about this, you're going to be able to gain depth and width in whatever subject you're studying. You could be implicated just because you have a picture taken with somebody, like what happened recently to someone. They were had their picture taken with a guy on the far right, and so all of a sudden now they're far right too. So it's like it's this craziness, and people don't want to do the work it takes to truly understand subjects, and so they simplify. I noticed,
but John,
I improved his understanding since a few years ago, because then he was primarily basing his work on the hypostasis of the archons and the findings of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of that backdrop. Now he's carried it further, and he's starting to get into the Sabbatean problem, but that's a very difficult challenge, because you'd have to include with that the developments that were beginning to come forward as philosophy within Europe, and end up leading to Hegelian dialectic, which Sabbatean doctrine out of modern philosophical streams most closely resembles Hegelian dialectic. The problem being is that a lot of this tends to become amoral, is that they see no revealed basis in morality. And as far as like Nietzsche, for example, Rudolf Steiner wrote a biography of Nietzsche at the request of some people, and the estate of Nietzsche asked him to edit Friedrich Nietzsche's works. And he said he would do it only if he could make a notation on the side margins of things that Nietzsche had written when he was ill and when he was healthy. So there was this kind of dark side of Nietzsche that came forward through his illness. He was slowly wasting away, probably of syphilis. But his works ended up being edited by his sister, Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche, who was a totally avowed Nazi. And a lot of the content in his later writings isn't him at all, it's her. So you see that these things are so complex.
Yeah, but
I just hope that people could be delicate in their approach to history.
Absolutely. But John, that's why I actually liked to see David Icke again on with Alex. As you know, I am a collaborator myself of InfoWars, and I have the honor of serving there as a Vatican correspondent. And when I can, I always give my input. And Alex has demonstrated himself to be really open to promote my work. And he has come down to Rome to understand it better. So, I mean, he has been the only one who I clashed at the very beginning of bringing out my information, which was in 2006, because he didn't regard me as a trusted source, because at the time I was involved with the Gallin movement, with the Muslims, and he was pretty right about that. and later on, though, he understood that what I was saying was correct, and he came to Rome, and we made a documentary together, and we sort out our differences in front of a glass of wine, and we ended up working together ever since. So I think that he's doing a great work also in bringing now back David, because I saw that David is trying to change, and this I want to make a question to Lowell. I want to give because this is very important. David has been accused of being anti-Semitic lately. A couple of years ago, I mean, I think he was actually even a year ago, he was forced to renounce to his Australian tour because they wouldn't even let him into the country. Now we see that he's trying to correct his assertions, because now he's going directly to the point. Instead of criticizing the whole Jewish establishment, he is finally realizing that there's been an heresy there, and he's discussing the Sabbatean Frankists. So I am glad that he's finally doing that, because a lot of right-wing ignorant people connected to anti-Semitism have used David Icke work in support of their assertions. And so by him correcting, himself and now attacking the Sabbatean Frankists, I think he's doing a service also to the Jewish people. Isn't that the case, Lowell?
Yes, I'll add something to that. One of the tactics of the Sitra Achra, the dark side of the force, which we absolutely believe exists, even though God created or allowed for the creation of the light and dark side of the force. It's very important. There are no multiple gods in traditional Jewish teachings. Isaiah 45. I create good, and depending on how you interpret the Hebrew word, I allow for the possibility of evil, and it's busy all over the world, is the idea of collective guilt. All the Germans are Nazis. If all the Germans are guilty, no one's guilty. The real everybody in Washington's a criminal. Then nobody's in Washington's a criminal. When you go that route, the real criminals can escape. So they love that. In fact, evil always likes to hide in good. In order to do what it does, it needs the outer core of respectability and normality. Most priests and nuns, child abuse, I don't believe that for 1 second. But the people who do these things will burrow into institutions and use the nice people, the good people, the respectable people as cover to do what they do. Now, for example, in our community, you have the same problem. Not in this. First of all, there aren't as many Jews as are Catholics. So the scale of child abuse in the Catholic world is, you're dealing with 1 billion people. How many Jews are there? 12 million. You also have rabbis who have been convicted in Israel and other places of sexual abuse and theft. So I just asked a group of colleagues yesterday, how many of those rabbis have been stripped of their smicha, rabbinical ordination and excommunicated? Answer, none. Same question now of the Catholics. How many of the priests who have been convicted of sexual abuse have been stripped of their ordination as priests and excommunicated? As far as I know, none. I'll take that a step further. How many Nazi war criminals, convicted Nazi war criminals, including Adolf Hitler, who were born Catholic, have ever been excommunicated? The answer, none. You want to know what a representative of the Vatican told me at an interfaith conference I went to in Heppenheim near Frankfurt in, 1981? He looked at me with this wicked little smile and said, well, Hitler wasn't a practicing Catholic. And I would have said to him, now, woe unto you, scribe Pharisees and hypocrites. Don't talk to me after 1900 years of mass murder, mass torture, mass vilification of Jews about the spirit of the law, the letter of the law, grace of faith. You don't have any of it. And Nazism, the Holocaust, and yes, it wasn't only Jews. We're not going to play a pain Olympics here. Rose in the heart of Christian Europe, and Hitler had his theologians too, such as Gerhard Kittel and Ludwig Hirsch. The Kittel commentary on the entire Bible is in almost every, certainly Protestant seminary. And he was, during the war, writing essays saying, go, go, go. He knew what was going on. Yes, Megillah, the Christ killers, give them what they deserve. And he didn't even renounce these views after the war. What does that say? King Solomon said, Reshit Chachma Yirat Adonai. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. If you don't have the fear of God, you can do anything. Hitler's theologians, scholars, scientists, you can do anything. Mao had them, Stalin had them, the dying deep state in London and New York has them. If you can have a big brain, but if you don't have a general fear of a creator of some kind with some kind of a moral order, that will be bad karma. You can and will do anything. So yes, David Icke, let's say, did the best he could and based on what he knew. Maybe the Jews or the established. Oh, wait a minute, let's look at it more specifically, because the people who do the real crimes, they love that. Ehud Barak doesn't want anyone to pay attention to him dancing cheek to cheek with Jeffrey Epstein. And who introduced Ehud Barak to Jeffrey Epstein?
Absolutely.
The worst globalist agent in Israel who did more damage to the new state of Israel than anyone else. Shimon Peres, who did us the favor of dropping dead and going to hell in September 2016, a month after Barry Hamish either died or was murdered.
And he
Florida.
was also linked to the Pope Francis and wanted to put together. He was also linked to the whole plan for the one world religion.
He was educated in Jesuit schools. He never denied this. Now I want to add something else about truth. Okay, look at this book. Understanding Autism for Dummies. Hello, Mr. Spock. Mr. Spock is one of us. If you're a high-functioning autist / Asperger, yes, no, black, white, right, wrong. Either it's true or it's not. Either it's Saturday night or it's not. No, but do I want it? A neurotypical, as we would call so-called normal people, I don't see anything normal about this world. Wait, do I want it to be Saturday night? What do I get out of that? Let's start running calculations. Cost-benefit analysis. Mr. Spock says, it's true, it's false. So you need all kinds of people. I would say that David Icke, from what I know, did the best he could based on what he knew. And this business of saying anti-Semitism, the worst, patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. You could also say religion is the last refuge of the scoundrel. I don't know who said that, somewhere around the time of the American Revolution. So these people who do the real crime say, oh, you're anti-Jewish or you're anti-German. Be specific. You want your missiles targeted like William Tell with the arrow right at the apple, or Luke Skywalker, you have 2 shots and you can take out the Death Star. Don't get distracted. So I don't believe that anytime someone says anything negative about Israel, oh, it's anti-Semitism. I don't like Harvey Weinstein, anti-Semitism. I don't like Bernard Madoff, and I don't like George, anti-Semitism. Don't start that with me. I don't like him either.
Absolutely. And we go back to Mayer Hamschel Rothschild, who founded this important dynasty, and he himself, some people say, might have been a Sabbatean. So this Mayer Hamschel Rothschild, who, of course, the Rothschild family is the typical Sabbatean Frankist in the way they operate, covertly, not really being honest with their intention, but also not being honest with their own religion. David, you have, of course, in Great Britain, have acquired the Rothschild, have elevated them to an aristocratic status, and have given them basically their ideal home in the city of London. What's your view on them?
But firstly, I've got to show a book because everybody else has. It has nothing to do with this at all, but I'm not being left out.
Fantastic. You will say
new book of Wilhelm Reich is called Fury on Earth. What a fascinating guy that is. So, as I say, it's nothing to do with the conversation, but I was determined not to. Oh, the eyes of the Lord are in everything, beholding the evil and the good. Proverbs 15:3. I don't know. Technically, I'm an old Catholic, which of course is an actual group of Catholics who rejected the idea of papal infallibility. So I'm also an initiated, consecrated Gnostic. So am I one of the swines? I don't know. Like David Icke. When he's talking about about 7-foot lizards, you know. He does not mean Jews. He means 7-foot lizards. You know, around because he knows that annoying. He knows that. So now he's going around saying there's a force. David, you mean 7-foot lizards? Just admit it, right? The Rothschilds. I don't know. I'm really not the best person to ask about British politics, particularly at the moment. I just get cranky the minute anybody.
Then, David, sorry to interrupt you. Let me ask you something else, as I know that you might be more knowledgeable about this subject. The exercises of Saint Ignatius. Because, I mean, very few people have actually gone through these exercises. And I went through the whole meditation process. And at one point, there is this whole hell moment in which you have to really, and so it seems like they are devised to open yourself to unseen forces. Isn't that dangerous, David?
I accept your analysis completely. Yes, they're designed to open the human psyche to unseen forces. I don't think there's any way around that. I don't think Ignatius would have denied that. Is that dangerous? Of course it is. You know, whether these things are just extended areas of our mind or extended areas of our mind which actually lead into a genuine metaphysical realm, which I personally think exists. Yes, it's dangerous, but, you know, life is dangerous. What matters behind it all is the orientation. You know, do you have goodwill in your heart? If you do, then trust it. If you don't, that's when the trouble begins, because you're playing with fire and you won't, as Lowell was saying, you won't care. In the end, you won't care. As John was saying, I don't think it leads to moral relativism. I think it leads to direct moral diminution. You know, you're looking at psychopathic territory here. People forget what it means to be good and bad. They forget what it means to be loving and caring. They forget what it means. You know, we've got to be careful. But that doesn't mean there aren't good spiritual directors. It doesn't mean there aren't good creative paths or circumstances whatsoever. Should you try and extend your spirit and the knowledge of the spirit in this life? Which is rightfully having a bad press at the moment, really has to start following its own formulas. I notice that what it's not done is repent, because it must repent before any forgiveness takes place. And if genuine repentance has happened, then forgiveness is a possibility. I haven't noticed any of that actually happening in the media or behind the scenes, which is deeply distressing. So in other words, the classic Catholic formula for dealing with all these things is just being completely ignored. You know, we don't end up with a pretty world if we're not careful. We end up with exercises to extend the consciousness that must only lead in a negative direction because there is no other. You know, the old Manichaean in me, you know, at the end of the day, it's a choice between light and darkness. And this is an age where we've really got to choose what we want, because everything is not simply relative. You know, does it get complicated? Of course it does. You know, most of the nice guys are really, really questionable. Some of the bad guys really aren't as bad as we think they are. But it doesn't mean there isn't a light and there isn't a darkness, because the minute we forget that, everything falls into darkness, not simply confusion. That's really as much as I've got to say on that. What's the great religion of the City of London? International banking. They gave up God years ago for mammon, and they're all quite happy with it. I mean, curiously, I've just come back from a meeting at the Karma Sanctum Hotel. It's not as scary as it sounds. It's very fashionable. It's fashionable. Where I was talking about Kazakh literature, and we were the paupers in the corner of the room, sipping tea as the banking elite were walking through preparing for the holidays. And so no. Does it surprise me that absolute bounders and cads, and do I mean the Rothschilds by that? I probably do. They're rewarded with every glory under the sun? Of course it doesn't, because the only thing that matters in this city is hard finance. How you get it doesn't matter. What you do with it doesn't matter. The simple procurement of finance is the one and only goal of modern London. And that's the state we've all been reduced to.
Thank you for your brilliant expose and for your honesty always, David. John, we discussed today, of course, the Sabbatean Frankists. We discussed their link with the Jesuits, which are many. And we have mentioned the figure of Dr. Falk, which, of course, Rudolf Steiner also mentions in his writings. What can you say us about this legendary figure, which, by the way, was never excommunicated by the Jewish community, and apparently also was very beneficial to the local synagogue?
Yeah, again, oversimplification is the challenge here. Let me push back to Count Cagliostro first. It's known that he did healings on thousands of people in Paris. They were literally lined up down the street, and he did all this for free. To say that the Count Cagliostro was nefarious in his intentions or anything like that is just sheer balderdash in my mind. The whole thing regarding the necklace and how he got arrested, and he was always being jerked around, but it's primarily machinations coming out of the French government. And so you have the controversial figure of Cardinal Richelieu, and who is a brilliant man. You should never underestimate Cardinal Richelieu, and he was one of the most influential people at that time. And you see these astounding figures that arise, and Dr. Falk could be considered.
Who, by the way, sorry to interrupt you, came from a family, the Richelieu family, which was a very particular family, which one of the most loyalist families to the Vatican cause in France.
Yes, absolutely. And so consequently, if you look into this and you say, okay, there's all these factions, but you have to remember that mankind is attempting to make a smooth transition from what you might call the age of blood ties or the age of tribalism into a modern, more cosmopolitan society. And so how do we do this? Well, the best example in the modern era is the founding documents of the United States that create an opportunity for people to have their communities and profess whatever background that they choose, and that the Constitution of the United States is directly created to constrain the government, to prevent them from interfering in the free expression of individual activity, religious expression, so on and so forth. Okay, so when you get into this kind of thing and you see the birth of modernity, as it might be called, it becomes a shift where it becomes intellectual, and that people, there's an evolution of consciousness, and it gets to the point to where people come to the experience where they are completely alienated from the experiences of their ancestors, who were able to see nature spirits and see perhaps angels and have supersensible experiences, veridical or truthful dreams, and so on and so forth. As we became more materialistic, people began to lose these faculties. Now we're getting at a stage where people are starting to have these experiences again. And so how can they incorporate this super sensible realm in a wholesome way? And like, for example, Knowledge of Higher Worlds, How is it achieved by Rudolf Steiner, tries to give you guidelines to prevent the pathology that could come with the improper crossing of the threshold. C.G. Harrison makes the point of that he gave instructions to an individual on how to cross the threshold in the spiritual world, and he said he'd never do it again because it had an imbalanced result on that individual. It takes a great deal of preparation to be able to come to the experience of the supersensible, and that people, they like to skip steps. They'll go take drugs, for example, and like David Icke took ayahuasca, for example, and he had experience of these mechanical elves, machine elves, as they've been titled. But I had those experiences 40, 50 years ago. I went through a lot of that kind of stuff. I knew Timothy Leary. I had dinner with him. I did a concert.
I met him too.
He's not a nefarious character. But Michael Savage thinks he's one of the most evil people in the history of the world. But no, he's not evil. He's just wrong. Okay, and there's a difference between being evil and being wrong. And I had hours and hours of discussion with Timothy Leary, and I asked him, I told him about my personal experiences of consciously leaving my body. Had he ever done that? But he was painfully honest. He said no. And so he couldn't, he could see the perplexed look on his face, because his whole basis of his thinking about consciousness has to do with chemistry. And if you take a drug, you'll have this experience. And therefore, people that wrote the Zohar or all these early mystics, they just took drugs, and they try to justify these experiences that there's some kind of drug.
It's like the drugs are a shortcut, John.
Yeah, it's a shortcut, but it doesn't fortify you to be able to deal with it in a wholesome way.
Absolutely.
And so you have to be very, very, very careful.
And it's very dangerous, because it's like me giving you a key for entering a room where something incredible is going on, but also very dangerous, and you might come back from that room literally shocked for life, like this.
Yeah, well, we're back to Mickey Mouse with the brooms and the buckets, taking over the room again, like we talked about last time. And so consequently, yeah, there's all manner of mischief that can arise from these types of endeavors. And so it's very easy to simplify your task and your studies and try to go, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. But life is a checkerboard square, and it's in a difference of degree. Most forms of magic are not black or white magic, they're gray magic. And so it's very, very
but at one point, John, and here I'm gonna then of course ask also Lowell, our Israeli reporter, to intervene, also because of his Jewish, of course, background. At one point, though, this Chaim Samuel Jacob Falk inspired almost the Faustinian element, which then Goethe, of course, who was also a follower of Count Cagliostro, laid down in his masterpiece. And then we have almost this confrontation, no, which we see also in the film, the Murnau's film, The Faust, this confrontation after this deal with the devil, this deal which is done at the crossroads, this deal which is done to achieve power over all things. It's a little bit like we are going back to the start when the Rothschild family laid their foundation. Who knows what kind of demonic deals they have done to achieve all that, Lowell?
What's the question?
The question is, do you think that the Rothschilds at the very foundation, as some researchers have claimed, had some kind of Kabbalistic and occult knowledge that fortified their work and established, of course, their whole dynasty?
That's, again, a subject you all know much more than I know. I know this. Someone sent me a link to a YouTube channel which deals with Switzerland and asked why the name Rothschild. It means red shield, and says the red shield of the red cross on a white background is the symbol of the Templars. And why would this family, whoever they were, use that name? Furthermore, the story that's told that there's a man he has in the Frankfurt ghetto. He has a table where he's changing money, fine. Rags to riches. By the end of his life, his sons are in business all over Europe. They say, gee, you know, that could happen. You know, look at Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller, rags to riches. Mm. Okay, I want to know more about that. What were their beliefs? Who are they? I really don't know. I do know there's quite a bit of research on the Supreme Court building right here in Jerusalem, that one of the French Rothschilds, a lady, paid for the whole thing. And she said, okay, I get to choose the architect, and nobody knows how much it costs. And the Masonic symbolism there isn't very subtle. There's a pyramid sticking out on top, and I've seen videos which very accurately describe the Masonic symbolism in our Supreme Court building. Now, I'm not exactly a fan of the Israeli judiciary, which is not exactly a repository of traditional Torah values. Let's go back a stage in terms of what John was saying about good magic and bad magic. The conflict between the prophets of Israel and the prophets of the other nations deals with all these questions. Do you get into, you can slowly go up the Jacob's ladder of prophecy in a kosher way, as the schools of the prophets Elijah, Elisha taught their followers, to achieve higher consciousness and what might be perceived by others as magical powers. We see the miracles performed by the prophets in the books of Kings. Or you can take shortcuts and be like a thief in the palace, like the magicians of Pharaoh, engaging in very unkosher practices. According to the Talmud, Bilam was considered a greater prophet than Moses, like the Sith Lord and the Master Yoda, and then Master Sidious said that he was actually on a higher level in terms of his knowledge, but that one of the ways he got his powers by having sex with his donkey every night. Very unkosher ways to harness sexual magic, harness powers. And then they end up like Elijah in the confrontation with the prophets of Baal, where these guys were involved in mass human sacrifice. And at the end of the confrontation on Mount Carmel, Elijah says, let none of them escape. The people took them down to the river, and it says, Elijah killed them all there. For what? Again, this is a very important point. It's not about wrong doctrines. It's about wrong behaviors. People say, oh, the Noahide laws have a prohibition of idolatry. That means, according to Jewish teachings, the Jews, if they ever get to power, are going to kill all the Christians who believe in the Trinity and Buddhists and Hindus. That's not real idolatry. It says in the prophet Malachi, chapter 1, verse 10, my name is great among the nations, God says, and feared by peoples all over the world, whatever their practices were. What does that mean? So it's about real idolatry is always mixed with theft, murder, and rape. It's not simply about doctrines and theologies. This is, for us, it's like in the book of Kings. The king did what was right, the king did what wasn't right. Not the king believed in consubstantiation or transubstantiation or the Trinity, or he didn't. All these things that people fought over in the Christian world and killed each other between the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches and the state Protestant churches. And that's why John brought up a very important point about the doctrine of religious liberty, not tolerance, which is enshrined in the American Constitution, comes out of the Anabaptist wing of the Protestant Reformation, which was and still in many parts of the world is a radical notion. Freedom of thought. You can have ideas I think are wrong, as long as you don't murder, don't steal, don't rape. You can go to the Unitarian Church or the Mormon Church or the Buddhist Dashram or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. That's very, very traditional Jewish kind of. Doesn't mean ideas aren't important, but it's about primarily what you do, which is why in the book of James, James says faith without works is dead. From my perspective as a person on the autistic spectrum, one of the aspects of the expulsion from the Garden of Eden was everything got fragmented. Left brain, right brain, heads, bodies, thoughts, concepts, actions. In our world, thoughts, concepts, and actions are one. You can't really distinguish them. Well, I had nice ideas. That's not good enough. So what did you do? So let's go back to the Rothschilds. In this group, whoever, whatever they are, I have to send you the video.
And
I'll tell you
one thing about,
what?
you mentioned earlier on the red shield of the Rothschilds with some researchers.
Yeah, the shield of the Templars.
Well, other researchers instead say that this is actually a Sabbatean Frankist symbol. So you see, there is different interpretations even there.
Whatever it is, whoever they were, Reverend David William Parry mentioned the city of London. Get the money. The God is the money. Sodom and Gomorrah, Tyre in the Bible. Okay, New York City. Don't think God can't deal with that. In December 2012 with Sandy, half of New York in a few hours up to 42nd Street was underwater. And where did it start? With the financial district? Right down by the water. Now, the storm could have been far worse. It went from a 6 to a 3 to a this and basically missed the city. If God wants to destroy a city, and the Quran also talks about the ruined cities, and not just Sodom and Gomorrah, he can do it in 1 minute. There really is a God. And when the balance of not power and terror, but good and evil, the balance starts to go like this. When Abraham says to God, if there are 10 righteous men, would you 50, 40, 30, 10, would you save the city? Once it goes below a certain minimal amount, it's okay, press the delete button. That could happen again today. And it's all related to, thoughts, words, feelings, and actions, primarily actions.
In that case, we can say that that is also maybe what has happened in Atlantis. So we can go even back thousands.
Maybe it's going to happen in Tel Aviv. Maybe it's going to happen in Tel Aviv. President Trump, he made a list in December 2017 of international criminals. People, if I catch you, will arrest you, will seize your assets. One of the people on that list is an Israeli who's a billionaire. Why is he on the list? And his father is or was an Orthodox rabbi, Orthodox, whatever that means, head of the diamond exchange, because he was using slave labor of kids in his diamond mines in Africa. And he's on President Trump's list. I have a few hundred more names right here I'd be very happy to add to the list. Well, I mean, and the way Q is going, they're going to be added to the list.
We can add to the list the Bear family in that case, no? The Bear.
Anyone all over the world. But it's based on what you do. Yeah. And not good or bad intentions. The Rothschilds, some of the Rothschilds, I'm going to send you the videos about the Supreme Court. I hope to see one day it's replaced by an authentic Sanhedrin with a restored monarchy, and Jerusalem will become truly a world capital according to universal biblical principles. And that then they'll really, it's taught in our tradition that in the years that Solomon reigned as king, there were no wars. Whether that's true or not, the idea was all the kings of the world came to listen to him. He taught them how to run your societies. Of course, he didn't do so well in the end because he had 700 wives and 300 concubines and too much sex on the brain.
Now,
then he fell.
Going
1,000.
Well,
I think it's only 365 days in a year.
Well, but that happened also with the first couple of czars of Russia who had to inseminate.
Catherine? Yeah, she was busy.
75 kids.
The first couple of czars of Russia had to inseminate the whole of Russia, and they came from Scandinavia to do that. So there is also it's kind of like a recurring theme. But going back instead to Atlantis. It's a belief, of course, for some people, but for the Jesuits, it became important. In fact, Athanasius Kircher dedicated part of his life to researching Atlantis. And at the same time, we see that the Atlantean adepts might have destroyed their own civilization by the misuse of black magic. And that definitely goes back also with Sodom and Gomorrah, no? And what can happen when you really exaggerate. Now, it seems like we are exaggerating right now in our own civilization, which is becoming more and more hurt by this demonic. I was just reading yesterday this article about by LifeSite News about a book that has been published and is now available in Walmart and Barnes & Noble on Amazon, a book addressed to children that can evoke demons.
Oh.
Now, I mean, we are really exaggerating here. I mean, this is like something that I couldn't have really even imagined, because an occultist makes a book. I mean, we went from the plain Ouija boards, and basically that already were an introduction to the demonic, to actually having a direct link to Satan, and basically giving them their phone number for little children who can call up the demon. Sorry, I want to have my my schoolwork done. It actually says it in the book. So, John, what do you think?
Well, you can really throw it at me here. Okay, well, yeah. First of all, yeah, you don't want to do that. It's so funny because we have.
Well, it's so funny, but not that funny.
It's not that funny, but if you look and you see that a lot of this is approached with a Harry Potter, Dungeons and Dragons kind of gameship mentality. Okay, so that so much of young people, you just say that, they would just roll their eyes like, oh, but you know, but ultimately it does open a door, and ultimately, if you get back and look at history, for example, all the work that we've done at American Intelligence Media and our brother organization, Americans for Innovation, we found at the core of the developments of history, and the understanding of history leads back to the Imperial Press Conference in 1909, that what was published in a book, and there were 650 journalists together, and the foreword to the book is written by Primrose, he was married to Rothschild.
Okay.
And so
but
the thing is if
the origins of this.
May I finish?
Yeah.
If we look at these things and we see, well, okay, who's doing this? I'm afraid you're going to find that the Rothschilds are in the center of the conversation. Now, that being said, I had a personal exchange with a member of the Rothschild family who's very much involved in really good work with deep sea research and preserving the oceans. And I asked him about some of the stuff regarding his family. He just said, well, yeah, but we're a very big family. And he just kind of dusted it off. It didn't have anything to do with him. But yet, Lynn Rothschild's his mother, and she's one of the biggest supporters of Hillary Clinton. And so to be able to just dust it off like that is not realistic. Plus the fact that he believes in this weird global warming debacle, which is just a bunch of made up stuff to generate money for a globalism, you know. So I guess we're all guilty of sins of omission at the very least.
So, I mean, Baroness Philippine de Rothschild, who died in 2014, used to go around with amulets with Baphomet on her chain. I mean, come on, more obvious than that you can't get. Apparently, her and her associate who opened the most important vineyard here in California have always drank their wine with a touch of blood. I mean, come on, it's like they open themselves to criticism, and in the process, they also make a lot of damage for the Jewish nation, for Israel, that they have supported from the very start. Isn't that the case, Lowell?
Yes. Alex Jones, David Knight, and Owen Schroyer are doing an excellent job. That's how I found out about you. I've been watching their show for about 4 or 5 years, since a convert to traditional Judaism from Texas, a real frontier Texas, Yellow Rose of Texas woman, said, watch Alex Jones. I said, who's that? She said, just go watch. So I started to watch. And for me, I nickname, as you know, Alex is Moses, David is Aaron, and Owen is Joshua. And they're doing a great job of exposing these things. For our perspective, Some Christians believe the return of Jesus is imminent. I have been asking them, how does that happen? One of them actually gave me a specific answer. He'll return as he left on the Mount of Olives. He went up, he'll come back down, and everybody will know. We also agree when the real Mashiach appears or is revealed, everybody will know. And then the work of President Trump and the patriots there, and now emerging in other countries, whether it's President Zelensky in Ukraine or Viktor Orban in Hungary or Salvini in Italy, or the Action for German, AFD in Germany, or Katie Hopkins and the others, all the people follow the money, follow the bodies, follow the drugs. And what happens? It's very simple. It says in the Tanakh, all the sinners of my people will die by the sword. And when you're dealing with murder, there's no concept in Jewish law of Wehrgeld in German. Did I murder someone in your tribe? Okay, I'll give you a few oxen or sheep. There's no monetary compensation for murder. Punishment is death. The only problem with the death penalty is what happens if an innocent person is put to death. As Gandalf says to Frodo, many who live deserve death, and some who die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too quick to deal out death and judgment. That's the problem there. Also, the commandment, thou shalt not steal, of the 10 commandments means literally, you shall not kidnap another human being. The punishment for that is death. So if you're involved in rape, punishment, death. There's no, well, I came from a bad home, you need remedial, you'll do community service. That doesn't apply. Theft, and I'm not talking about, the Bible acknowledges that he steals because he is hungry. He's not talking about people who are destitute and poor. It's not like white-collar crime. They're not victimless crimes. If you're Robert Maxwell or whoever you are and you raid your pension funds and people can't live and they commit suicide or they die of cancer, the punishment for theft is death. Punishment for rape is death. Punishment for murder is death. There's a reason Guantanamo is being expanded now. That's actually happening because there are a lot of people from a lot of countries that are going to end up there. So about the Rothschilds or whoever it may be, it's not an issue of you're bad for the public relations of the Jewish people. No, you're bad. If you're Harvey Weinstein, if you're Jeffrey Epstein, if you're someone in the Mossad or whomever,
let's go to talk about.
It's now we believe that it's the beginning of the Messianic, very beginnings of the Messianic era. There's a reason, as the Bible says in Isaiah, the earth will no longer hide its slain. Whether it's Epstein Island, I don't care where it is, in Cambodia, all the bodies are going to be on earth. Now let's go back to the other point you mentioned about children. The Sitra Achra, the Satan, always loves to torture, murder, rape children. There's a reason when the Nazis exterminated 5 to 7 million Jews and millions of other people too, including 500,000 gypsies, that 1.5 million of those Jews were kids. And there's a reason at the end of the war when they were losing, they took the ashes and spread them over all the fields. It was cultic, sacrificial mass murder. This was a religious, the death camps were like what they have in Central and South America with the Aztecs and the Incas. These were cultic centers for ritual mass murder. And then you get to another point. You asked me, does it say in the Talmud to murder Christian kids? What any group, what the state Protestant, Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox churches did historically is, what's that name, that activist, Saul Alinsky, look in the mirror each morning, anything you don't like it, blame it on the other guy. That's what the Democrats do in America. Then even Democrats, I call them the demon craps dementors. I'm using the term from Harry Potter. Blame your enemy for everything you do yourself. Everything you don't like about yourself, I steal. Oh, look, the Jews steal. Look at the Jews do. Anything you don't like, blame it on them. But let's leave that. Well, people who do stuff, you're involved in stuff like that, there's no excuse. And when the king will come back and sit on his throne, then the war crimes trials, they're about to begin in Washington, London, and right here too, and around the rest of the world, including communist China, when the communist Chinese regime falls. And I believe they had the prophetic 70 years, 1949, 2019, it's over, it's finished for them.
But let's go back to what you said about Alex. I mean, unfortunately, that supporting, in a way, Israel or supporting certain visions got him to be accused all over the internet of being a Zionist, of being somebody who is working for the Mossad. They went as far as saying that the Austin Command Center is like a Mossad terrorist cell or something. I mean, it's insane, the accusations that they make against us at InfoWars. And I'm sure that unfortunately, they are driven also by a lot of people who, of course, are pushed towards criticizing InfoWars because they have their own agenda. And one of the things that they have done, I remember immediately after Alex came to Rome, and we did the documentary together denouncing the Vatican and denouncing a series of things which after manifested in the years to come as scandals. And we really opened a Pandora's box there. Immediately, they attacked Alex in a way that was unprecedented, and they started to censor him more than before, because when you are starting to touch on the real problems, and the real problem here is that the Vatican is the same Roman Empire that 2,000 years ago was in Israel. It's the same Roman Empire that destroyed the temple. It's that force that still is the driving force of the upcoming one world religion that will make deals with the Imam, the most powerful Imam of Al-Azhar, who is basically also the most anti-Semite person on earth. Isn't that the case, Lowell?
Yes, very close to where I live and work. Over the river and through the dell, down the hill and up the hill is Mount Zion. On top of Mount Zion, built, I think, 1904, 1905 by the German Benedictine order, is the Dormition Abbey. Most people don't know, and I only know because a person who's no longer alive, who was a German officer who converted to Judaism from World War II and came here, he went on a spiritual journey and went to many different countries and chose Judaism and lived here since 1956, married a Holocaust survivor, and was from a Catholic background in southern Germany. He said the Dormition Abbey on Mount Zion is an exact replica, stone for stone, of Charlemagne's cathedral in Aachen, where he was crowned head of the Holy Roman Empire in the year 800 by the Pope. And the intention of doing that by the Benedictines was at some point in the future, well, World War I got in the way, a new Holy Roman Emperor, German, of course, like Otto, like Frederick, would be crowned in Jerusalem, head of a Holy Roman Empire, and from Jerusalem run the whole world. And I've learned from my sources that according to Vatican teachings, the Vatican can transfer its operations to Jerusalem. Barry Hamish wrote a lot about this, and that may be their intention. That may be their intention.
Now, Professor Scholem, who we have mentioned as being an excellent source on the Sabbatean Frankist, said, the Frankist believer must not appear to be as he really is. And so do the Jesuit priests that have been born a long time before the Sabbatean Frankist. And I have witnessed myself that with a guy called Father Thomas Michel, who is the former secretary for interreligious dialogue at the Jesuit Curia in Rome, who I met and who I saw with my own eyes behaving like a practicing Muslim, praying as a Muslim, acting as a Muslim, and he even lives in Izmir in Turkey, where, by the way, the first Donne group, Donne is basically are the Sabbateans, was found. And so Father Michel really showed me how the Jesuits merge, infiltrate, and act in ways that, you know, for a traditional Catholic, it would be like a complete scandal. Then, when I met him, I also spoke with him, and he talked to me about his plans to convene that year. I met him in 2007, in early 2007. He told me that in July 2007, he would bring together a group of Jesuits involved in Jewish relations in New York at the Fordham University. and talk about also a group of Jesuits involved with a special group of Jews involved in relations with the Muslims that were organizing by invitation only an event in Georgetown University in the month of August 2007. And so I started to see that there was something wrong about this whole thing, about this guy. And he was acting basically just like a Sabbatean, and they were planning something. They were working at something. And nowadays, apparently, he lives in Izmir like a complete Muslim. He dresses like a Muslim. He goes every Friday to pray at the mosque. David, that's not a Christian, I'm afraid. You can be as open as you want to all the religions of the world. You can be ecumenical as you want, but there must be a way of, drawing a line here.
Well, I mean, you know what an old liberal lefty softy I am, Leo. I mean, I'm hands up on this, and we've got to find ways of better humanism, but we've also got to find more honest ways. I mean, if what you've just said, and I've no reason to doubt you at all, because a very good commentator, you're a good scholar, I was thinking as you were saying the phrase of our good Lord, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Be honest in all things. This is, I can't see who this serves. It doesn't serve the gospel. The gospel is love and truth. The gospel is love and peace, not dishonesty. I am going to force you into swallowing my doctrine is not found in the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know how to comment on those things. I'm perfectly aware, sadly, that they take place. But, at the end of the day, spirituality must have something to do. I made the mistake of asking, I better be careful with this one, a very highly placed friend of mine in the Church of England a couple of years ago, whether any of their recent appointments had anything to do with spirituality. And he turned to me with an expression of horror, offended his grandparents, but call me old-fashioned. I think religion and spirituality have something in common. If you're trying to expand your consciousness, lead a more spiritual life, you must, by definition, be more honest, more authentic, open, yes, but sincere. Now, the minute that level of subterfuge creeps into an equation, I personally get suspicious. I like knowing what the differences are, and then I can think about them, and then I can agree or disagree. For me, most of the world's great religions all end up marrying somehow in a vision of love and truth and goodness, but I'm not sure that level of subterfuge leads anywhere to other levels of subterfuge. And I feel very distressed by that, because I do think there are good Muslims. I said very loudly
that at the end of this show, we understand that acting covertly, either for Jesuits or either for Sabbatean Frankists, has not served the purpose of bringing forward any true religious, truths. And so I thank you so much today, all of you, Lowell in Jerusalem, John in Detroit, David in London, for your sincerity, for being so open, for being really truth, and bringing this truth out in the open to my viewers, who today are many, and probably in the next few days will be even more. So we can put clarity. We invited, and I want to say this, I invited David Icke on this show. And I invited him a few weeks ago, and he refused. He didn't even reply, which I found very rude. I don't have anything against him. I just wanted to have a dialogue of a certain level. And John, of course, will be in it, but all of you who have been a great opportunity.
Don't feel bad. I've been blown off by some of the most luminary of the independent media pundits out there, and I don't take it personal.
I mean, I don't know what he's afraid of, but of course it would have been an excellent confrontation for our audience. Our audience knows very well. We had also Jordan Maxwell here. We had many other eminent representatives, community. And I want to also say that we're going to have next week, we have the honor of having a special guest, which is going to be Ronald Schmidt, which is one of the biggest authorities in the world on UFOs. He's about to start a new series on the History Channel. So we're going to have also a talk about what Tucker Carlson has said lately about the government having in their hands evidence of UFO activity. Lowell, you wanted to say something?
Yes, to be fair to David Icke, when we came back to Israel on April 1st, 1992, we had been here from 82 to 85. We came back with 2 baby girls. But while I was in New York, I worked for 2 public relations firms on Madison Avenue, small ones called boutiques. And one thing I learned from that is it's possible if you send an email message or a fax or a letter to someone, they might not have gotten it. I was always would follow up, and
Lowell, in this case,
yes.
First of all, I talked with somebody who knows him, who made sure that the email was the correct one, and it was the son, and so I was 100% sure that he got the mail. So there is no excuse. I wasn't just sending a mail blind. So, I mean, it's him who has refused. And I think personally that one of the reasons why David refuses a confrontation with me is simply because we come from 2 different backgrounds. But I don't have a problem. I mean, I have David here on the show, and he claims to be some kind of socialist. Everybody knows that me and David differ, for example, on the monarchy. He thinks that England should give up on the monarchy because the Windsors have made a shame of themselves. I said the Windsors should leave the monarchic house because the Windsors are no more the legitimate holders of a sensible monarchy in the UK, but the institution for me of the monarchy in the UK, I'm not saying in the US where we have a constitutional republic, but for the UK, if you substitute that, the day after, you're going to have a bunch of socialist, communist demons that are going to bring the country to hell and back into EU and all that. So just so you know, I mean, but it doesn't make a difference if me and David get along on that point, because we have so many other things we get along. So I know that David Icke is basically a left-wing, green, communist style. I saw actually that on the show with Alex, though, he started to criticize even the Green Party and certain left-wing elements. So I must say that he's rectifying certain positions he had. But I'm an anti-communist. It's too much for me. I get sick if I'm in the same room with a communist. And at the end, because I know the evil of this ideology that has destroyed so many people. My family had to leave Russia because of communism. My grandfather was nearly killed by a bunch of communists while he was working. He was one of the people in charge of the council in Messina. I have people in my family who were persecuted, including myself, by communists. So for me, communism is an ideology that needs to be wiped off the face of the earth. And if any of you have anything to say about that, I don't care. Because
but Alex Jones himself said that he wondered if his emails to David Icke were being intercepted. You remember, for a while, we couldn't email to each other. So don't totally dismiss the possibility that there is some kind of break in communication.
It's possible. It's possible.
You might contact Alex directly and have him speak to David. But anyways, don't forget to tell people about your wonderful books. And I can't wait to see the new one.
Yes, absolutely. I will bring it out hopefully before Christmas. It's going to be volume 4. It's basically American Renaissance 2.0 and this invisible link and all that goes with it. But there is basically a whole history that needs to be said about the Jesuits, their practices, what they stand for, and of course their links to the Sabbatean Frankists and to every single secret society, and what we are living with Pope Francis, but historically bringing back to the foundation, the very foundation of the Jesuits. So, I mean, it's definitely a very interesting book, and I'm looking forward to publish it. At the same time, I will invite all our viewers to donate to each one of you. If you have any PayPals you want to announce through this broadcast, how they can donate to you, David? Because I know that you also do a lot of great things for the poor. You help the poor. You have any way that the people can give you some? I was asking you.
Well, I mean, you know, the good old-fashioned Facebook, Facebook, LinkedIn, my website, davidwilliamparry.com. Christmas isn't always the best time for everybody. We've got to be realistic, you know. And but this is South London. The homeless are everywhere. It's getting freezing. I'm really worried. If you want, you know, and it needn't be money, you know, try having a heart, come and help us over the Christmas period. But, you know, we need help, and in any way you want to support us locally, please get in touch with me, because we'd be very grateful. This is a time when we've got to remember the love in our hearts and try and share it with those that are going through very difficult times. You know, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Father David. The new Lowell, how can people reach you and support your cause?
They could email me at lowellgallin@gmail.com, which I have to do it, switch to Proton Mail, but I've been told by one of my friends who's high-tech that's still going from the frying pan in the fire, because Proton is CERN and they're no good either. Okay, I neither accept nor welcome donations. This, my journalistic work is in the same category as my volunteer work, once a week at Hadassah and Karam Hospital. So I'm not looking for or welcoming receiving donations. Though I'm not saying that, for example, Alex Jones, he finances his, the way he does it is through selling products, which is good.
Myself, I accept donations, and I please invite people to send us donations to make possible all this build up of a technical, you know, functionality that is more professional.
I'm all in favor of viewer support. For example, with Pulitzer, I don't like Pulitzer, but when they needed money to finish the Empire State Building, in one of his newspapers, he said, if every American gives $1, we'll finish it. And they came, and he was an honest man in that sense. They came in the envelopes. They got enough money to finish the Empire State Building. So I'm all in favor of Kickstarter campaigns and grassroots funding, especially of the, I don't like the term alternative media, independent media that you used. Absolutely. I'm all in favor of that. Though in my particular case, with the Root and Branch Association, our little association, it's intentionally a all-volunteer, basically an idea incubator of a small group of people here and abroad, some of whom unfortunately have died. So in saying I'm not looking for donations, not welcoming, I'm not saying anyone else shouldn't. It's just that's not the way I operate.
I would like to remember, in fact, Barry Kamish. I would like to remember some of our friends who passed away, who definitely were instrumental in...
he was one of them, one of the group.
And if you have any other ones that you want to remember, because, of course, they have done a great work. John, how can people support you?
Well, I have my PayPal account is paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. You can find out about my contributions by going at John Barnwell 888 on Twitter. Facebook is too kind of unwieldy to deal with just public people. But I also have my books on eBay. By myself, John Barnwell. That's the Arcana of the Grail Angel and Arcana of Light on the Path. And that will give you the cosmological basis for some of the themes that I get into, which is very...
and John, somebody was on the comment board saying they haven't seen intelligence media for a while. That's because...
I want to say something.
Yes.
Yeah, they've migrated from YouTube because the terms of service have changed. And they feel it may be the case that if they don't click on accepting the terms of service, that they'll be able to grandfather in the things they've already created, and they won't get eliminated. Who knows? But you can just go to the aimfortruth.org, or just do a Google search, or some form of search engine that you prefer, of American Intelligence Media, and also Americans for Innovation. Or you can just go to my Twitter account, at Barnwell 888, and you'll find links that will lead you wherever you have to go. But yes, they no longer post on YouTube.
We will keep on here on YouTube because
Leo,
was that
Mount Athos.